So Jeff asked if I would talk about this because I had proposed it as an idea a little while ago, and I couldn't ignore requests to talk anymore because we all should do our part to talk about the good work that we're working on. So let me see if this advances the slide properly. Okay, so why give this talk? As Jeff mentioned, I'm at Stanford. I'm a research software engineer, and I lead a group at Stanford, a technical group that's part of a research consortia, Bioinformatics Center. So why did I want to give this talk? Part of it had to do with the recruiting tables at conferences that we've seen, or even on the virtual conferences, there's recruiting tables that you see. And those recruiting tables don't feature the kind of roles that I'm in, because research funding from the National Institutes of Health or the National Science Foundation doesn't pay for big recruiting tables and swag and sponsoring conferences. They try to put as much possible directly into the research, funding everything from either on-premise or cloud resources to the actual people who are doing the work, the people who are doing the experiments. And so I wanted to represent from a different perspective because I'm a programmer in a research, as a research software engineer. And I just want to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer, and I'm not saying that any other option is a bad option. There's lots of great options, certainly ones that I've considered over time and reconsider over time. Some of the other options for developers who are using Python are at the big companies, the FANG companies you've seen, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. And then there's startups who are using Python frameworks, either service-oriented architecture, or maybe they're using monolith because it makes sense to do that. And they're using Django or Flask or Fast API or Pyramid or any other Python framework. And then there's groups like ours that are research software engineering, and they're typically at a university. And I'm going to talk about some points that are relevant to us and our kind of engineering using Python in our space. So it's a little bit about me, just some ways to contact me or find me. I'll talk some more about the projects that I've worked on. So I'm the lead engineer. I also manage a team of engineers. Generally, I go by Dalton online. My initials, KD. The name Dalton also is refers to there's a chemist called John Dalton many years ago, who it's referred to as the molecular weight of hydrogen. And proteins are measured in thousands of Daltons, so kilodaltons, and in lots of papers as I was reading, because my original background was as a molecular biologist, proteins are measured in kilodaltons, KD or KDA. And so I took that name, and so lots of places where you see kilodalton online, that tends to be me. So first, but before I talk about the slide, I'll talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a research software engineer in a consortia. Let's use Stanford as an example, but other research institutions as well. They get lots of research funding from a lot of places. And there are other key core business units, things that handle student services, things that handle HR. And if you think of like a dandelion, that's the center core part, core business needs. And then there's groups like mine that are like the dandelion seed, where our funding comes from an external resource. But we are connected to the university. I'm a Stanford University employee, for example. But because there is that separation from the core business things, it allows some flexibility. So what are some of the advantages of being a research software engineer? When big funding agencies like National Science Foundation or NIH funds you, they want your code to be open source, which means that your contributions are documented. I'm sure many people on the call today have made changes to things or contributions to tools at a company. And when somebody asks you, well, can I see your code? And you say, well, it's in a company repo, I can't show you. But the advantage of this, you have, you know, you're inspired to and urged to and required to ultimately share your tools as open source. So you have a good excuse to make your code shareable. The other thing that's nice about it is because we're at the edge of the university, we're connected to and have responsibilities to the university, but also to our other partners, we have flexibility to implement a stack that's right for your project, which I alluded to before. You could use Python in any frameworks. We can use scripts, you can change versions of Python. Your ability to move in the direction that's right for your team is helpful. Sometimes that can be a challenge though, because as we know, too many choices can lead to analysis paralysis in terms of deciding what the right thing to do for your team is. But it's also really nice that you're not locked into a monolithic framework that's 50 years old typically, because these research funded projects are of a different scope. So, and the other nice thing, what I try to tell the people that join my team, that you're always working on relevant tech. We're working in the cloud, whether it's AWS or GCP or another cloud provider. We're using the same frameworks, we're using the same Python. Sometimes oops, I have a little typo in there, smaller user base, because the data that we generate is technical data. We have visualizations, and I'll show you the homepage of the project that I'm working on now, and we're going to have more visualizations around that data. But for some aspect of it, a deep dive, it requires some technical expertise to understand it. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible. And with this bigger data, if you say that to somebody that's one of the FANG companies, they say, well, we throw out petabytes of logs every day. We do big data. But when you sequence somebody's whole genome, when you do a transcript analysis, it's a lot of storage cost, and the analysis and compute on that is very big. I guess, and I haven't talked about the projects, we haven't come up to that slide, but I'll cover the kinds of work that I do that Jeff alluded to. So cloud and big impact, because for instance, one of the projects that I worked on a few years ago is now an FDA certified database. And I'll talk about some of the things around those projects when that slide comes up. So, and the other thing in research science, when you're trying to say, oh, I contributed to this project, publications come out. So publications are forever, and your name is always attached to them. Maybe that doesn't make as much of a difference to you, but it is a record of your impact. It's a quick look at just some of the papers that came out. I was really excited that the current project I'm in had a big paper in one of the major science journals Cell last year. So I wasn't one of the lead authors, but it was really exciting. And so another aspect about this research software engineering that's really compelling is you get to collaborate with scientists and engineers both in your group and across the nation and the world to try to really make changes for the better. I was really proud of this. I got to actually go on site at NIH in the before times in January on behalf of my project. Like this is a super nerd moment for me that I get to go to the NIH campus on behalf of our group. That's the National Institutes of Health, which is one of the major funding agencies. And the Common Fund funds our project, and the Common Fund funds big projects. So mission driven, what you do matters. I'm not seeing my other slide where I have the some of the projects, and maybe I moved it to a different place in the slide. So what about the money? So if you're working at a university, they're not going to be able to get paid the same amount as Netflix. But the funding cycles mean that you're funded out 1 to 5 years, and it's stable and predictable. And so for some people in their life, sometimes you want to hustle, and sometimes you just want to do good work at a regular pace, mostly. I mean, still systems need care and feeding and monitoring, but you want to have a normal life. You want to do good things and have a normal life. And there are other benefits of working in a university, that like tuition programs to help you or help your kids. So some of the jobs are the same kinds of jobs that you would have in industry. Full stack, where you're kind of doing end to end, either full stack where you're just going APIs, I mean, sort of a back end and up to the JavaScript and CSS layer. Also back end where you're just like working on core APIs. One of the things that's really important is that for NIH is that data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible.
Hey, Karen.
Yes.
What about a longer term benefit, like a pension program?
I don't know of any. I have not heard about a pension program anywhere. I don't know if that exists in the modern day. Does anybody else? You can pipe in on the chat if you've heard about pension programs at any universities or companies. I think most of those have been phased out, except for I think maybe there's a federal service that was forced to fund a pension program. But they, I don't think that's, but with places like Stanford contribute to your retirement funds. I don't know what CalPERS is. Sorry, I can't really speak to, I'm talking more about the technical parts. I don't have aspect to that. I know Stanford may probably other research opportunities. UCSF probably have information about what kind of benefits they have. I know Stanford tries to be as clear as possible on that.
Karen, do you mind if I ask my own question, since I can't put mine in the Q&A app like everyone else?
Sure.
What about just the interesting domain difference? You know, for example, what about, hey, I got this brand new cool, I get to learn about the new data, this new data thing, this new science thing, versus yet another app on cow tipping on virtual farming or whatever, you know, do you see what I'm saying? What about the domain interest? What about a more interesting domain compared to?
Yeah, so because I'm in presenter mode, I'm not seeing my slide deck, but maybe I thought it was earlier up in the slides, but maybe I skipped over it.
Oh,
so let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing and why it's compelling to me, since you asked the question. So all of us have DNA. It's at the core of us. It's like the encyclopedia that runs our whole system. Everybody has changes from one person to another, and we look a little bit different. We operate a little bit differently. It's amazing that it works at all, because so many things have to go right at the molecular level, all the way up to the organ level, all the way up to the full person level. So the current study that I'm on is the Molecular Transducers of Physical Activity Consortia. And that is trying to understand how physical activity makes us healthier. That's the main project that I work on. So we know physical activity makes us healthier, but we don't actually understand at a molecular level why, right? So we all have the same genome. We all have DNA, but it varies from person to person. We make different levels of messages. If you think about the DNA, it makes photocopies. That's your RNA. You probably heard about that because they made an RNA vaccine. It makes photocopies of that, which makes proteins. There's different levels of those copies that are made. There's different levels of proteins that are made from those copies. Those proteins have molecular switches on them. Those molecular switches mean there's different amount of chemicals that are being made. Those chemicals send other signals back and trigger other things to be made and happen. And there's a whole orchestration of things that have to happen. And my particular project it was originally funded as a $250 million project. So imagine that you get to be hired to work on like a $250 million startup. Our job is the same. We have to ingress and safely egress data and send it to downstream partners and work with collaborators at other data consortia who are sharing this data, and work with bioinformatics scientists to help them with quality control, to help them identify that the submissions are correct, everything from cleaning the data to helping them run the pipelines in the cloud. So that's really compelling. And it's possible that these other slides will come up. And so to your point, that's tremendously compelling to me as a reason to work in this job. Do I get tempted to work at other places? Yes. Have I worked in other places? Yes. But this job was this opportunity was really exciting. So that domain space, to be in that space with really smart people, some of the smartest people in the world are collaborating on this project, is really cool. Another project that I was a lead on is the clinical genome variant curation interface. That was really cool, full stack application, also a Python framework in the back end. That, you know, we each have genetic differences. Some are important or some are not. If you get your DNA sequenced in the early days, if your sequence different from mine, which one means, and you have a disease, is that your change a disease or is it not? And over time, people were interpreting that in artisanal ways, right? This change is good, this change is bad, or is it not? We needed more data and we need to do it in more structured ways. So when a person in Boston makes a decision that you need a cardiac defibrillator implanted in your chest cavity, and the person on the West Coast interprets, they're making the same kind of decisions based on the same rules. So we're supporting the ingestion and structured, you know, workflow in ClinGen. And for MoTrPAC, there are this humongous controlled experiment that got delayed a little bit because there was a pandemic in terms of the human interaction, active, sedentary, pediatric, elite athletes, over a time series, different kinds of exercise. And then that data comes in, and our job is to make something engaging and beautiful. I'm seeing some questions come in. Let me hang on to those, and I will circle back at the end if that's okay. Oh, great. So like I thought I had a slide, and oh, here, I skipped over it. So MoTrPAC is the project that I'm currently working on. ClinGen I mentioned, and ENCODE is another one where it's encyclopedia of DNA elements, because on the DNA itself, not only proteins bind to it and control it, it's got molecular switches on your DNA that come off and on. There are regulatory regions on the DNA outside of protein coding regions, and there's regulation at every level. A million things can go wrong all the time. So it's amazing that we can walk and talk, and like when you get a scratch in your skin, it just heals and it works. But the nice thing is when they make this data, this beautiful data, or do these beautiful experiments, that data has to go somewhere. That data has to be served. That means you're making APIs and other tools to be able to send and serve that data and make it accessible. So, okay, so I think that was towards the end, and I'll look at these questions. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the time. But I wanted to really talk about it because when people are looking for Python jobs, you know, I don't have a table. Like, we can't fund a table, but there's really compelling and interesting things. As Jeff mentioned, I was also involved with a COVID project where they're also doing the similar kinds of experiments on COVID. There's obviously, we've heard about variants that are out there. There are variants existing in the Bay Area space. Which people get sick? That's an important thing to know. Which people are at higher risk based on their genotype, which is your genetic sequence. There's other omes. So my project is a multi-omic. So genomic, epigenetics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and other omics. the immunospace, which is immunomics as well, and compiling and aggregating all that data in a meaningful way and presenting things about it is tremendously challenging, but tremendously compelling. And so I'm glad that you brought that up so that I had the opportunity, because I skipped over that slide apparently. So, okay, so I'm going to answer some questions. Thanks, Karen. Jeffrey West, scale. Santa Fe Institute, physicist on biological urban, people scaling superlineal and sublineal might be of interest if you haven't seen it. Craig, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe is that a book or a I'm not sure what that refers to. You can also put it in chat. Are internships, apprenticeships available? Typically, not in the typical way. If there's I'm just going to throw this out. If you're interested in working on a project, you find something in the interwebs that you find is compelling, email that team, reach out to them. Usually there's a help desk or other email. And if you want to contribute or you find a repo and anywhere, whether it's big data, open source packages like Pandas or another consortia, you can contribute to them that way. Sometimes different institutions may have limits on who can get access to systems if you are not a paid employee. So it can vary, and so I can't really speak to that. It's not a typical thing for a research consortia like ours. Or we're one funded group out of many funded groups in the current consortia. In ClinGen, there was 3 major groups, but split between institutions. Do research groups ever hire Python developers on an independent contractor basis? Yes, sometimes. Because of our funding model, it has to be well scoped out, but it's a possibility. That might sometimes, yes. Do you always sometimes run on Kubernetes Docker for project data? Yeah, so that's a good question. So Docker is really helpful in the scientific community because here's what happens. You have a pipeline of data that you have to run, and everybody wants to make sure that the results are the same. It would be bad if you had a pipeline and you ran it and I ran it and we got different results. So it's important to know the version of software. And because even if you're checking MD5s at the end to make sure that the result is the same, or maybe you want to check that the scientific validity is the same, but the MD5 is different, or do you actually get a new interpretation? And so Docker is a common way for people to make for data pipelines to be able to run that. We certainly use Docker in the cloud for many aspects of our work. It's a way to be able to run something locally, and then you can plop it in a cloud environment with the appropriate controls, and then it's going to run the same in the cloud as it does on your local machine. I've also in the cloud, spun up Ubuntu machines and used setup configs to make that Ubuntu environment completely the way I wanted. So I've used both things. And back to that retirement support, pensions and 401k at a research institution, because we're a nonprofit, it's a 403B or something. Again, I'm not a financial person. Most of that stuff is online for research institutions. So I think the other thing is at about a university that I'll put out there, that there's a lot of interactive collaborative projects. I've been involved and advised other projects that are happening. There's a cloud community at our institution. It's not for everyone. There are some challenges. You're never going to get stock options. at a research university, but it can be tremendously compelling and exciting in really interesting ways that excite me and make it hard for me to be recruited by the companies that want to talk to me, because I can do great technical things, and that is also compelling, but I'm also compelled by being part of finding beautiful answers in complicated situations and helping teams to do that. Even if I'm not the one finding the answer, that I am, you know, we're building a beautiful house together, and, you know, there's a part that requires plumbing, and I, you know, the plumbing and infrastructure associated with our work is something that I'm responsible for, or I and my team. So any more? Oh, Craig, if you want to, what has changed, evolved in terms of collaboration and putting together teams recently on projects? So there's a big push for data interchange. What has happened in some of these big research consortia is that they had beautiful, smart people develop a data model, and that data, you know, would generate something interesting. And one of the pushes has been around collaboration is these core, let's say, there are model organism databases like genetics of fruit flies, genetics of yeast, genetics of humans. And now those groups were funded separately, but now they're being funded to talk to each other more, have that data have common data models. There's the Common Fund is a data ecosystem where they're urging a place like Kids First in Philadelphia to be able to talk with other groups. Kids First is doing a lot of pediatric diseases, also in a multi-omics space like ours. There are other ones working on pain and other things. So those groups talking to each other, coming up with common metadata models, that's one way. And also we have collaborators at the university that are on related similar projects and expertise. This research group, like yours, require developers to have domain knowledge like biology. For the work we're doing, does it help? Yes. Is it needed? No. Because at the core, and what I tried to say is that we're ultimately making software like for like a startup. It just is an impactful startup where we share our code. How did you stumble upon this role? What did you do before? I originally was in molecular biology. I dropped out of my PhD program in cell molecular biology many years ago, and I was working at a biotech company in California, and I had a colleague who I knew from graduate school, and he was putting academic journals online. And I thought, this is a beautiful marriage. It's scientific knowledge and programming, and I'd done some programming. That's another story. I'd always wanted to be a programmer, and I had a bad experience in high school, and so I went into science instead, but I've always wanted to do those two things. So this kind of merging of technology and biotech is something I've been interested in. And so I worked in some other jobs, and I was at a biotech company, and I was working in a startup in San Francisco on also a biotech project, but then there was an opening in a lab for the ClinGen project. And then I went to another startup, and then I came back to work on this project. It was tremendously compelling. So, but I've been a developer for over 20 years in a variety of languages, and Python and R are the sort of lingua franca of research science. And there's other tools that are being used for different kinds of things, or you know, how notebooks are being made at different companies, but Python is the main language. Sorry, I haven't been watching the time. I think I've gone a bit over. but anything else?
Just one last thing to answer your question about the scale. It was a book. The
Okay.
answer was there's something called Jeffrey West scale.
Okay. Thank you for, I will look into that. I'm always interested in things. And if you're interested in precision medicine, which is kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, if you've heard about that over the past several years, being able to give people the right medicine based on what their disease is. It's not a plug for him, but I think it is kind of an interesting, and there's interesting stories in it called Genome Odyssey that my boss, you and Ashley, just came out with. If folks are interested in this space and trying to be a detective about how things work by using the genome and these other kind of experimental tools, these other omics, to find out why, people with mysterious illnesses, what's the core heart of their, why they got sick. Everything from heart disease to really undiagnosed diseases that are mysterious. Sometimes it's a single nucleotide change, sometimes it's a complicated set of changes. So feel free to, I didn't put the full link, but if you do your normal link on LinkedIn and do /Karen-D if you want to reach out to me. I didn't talk about, there's a US research software engineering. I don't have the link here, but I could add that link. It's not, if you're not already in the world, it's hard to know, which is why I wanted to talk with the group today, because there's really compelling things. And there are a number of health tech companies in the Bay Area who are using Python either to do laboratory software or other things. This is my experience. And I'm not saying that those aren't good options, but those are challenging in different ways. It could go up, it could go down, funding could go away. Our funding is more stable, which means that you won't be a big winner, but also it can be a good life as well with a compelling ongoing work for periods of time and with relevant tooling and software. So it can be a compelling option as a journey in your career, whether it's earlier on or later on. I do have the option to do other things, but I've chosen to be here. Not saying that the other choices are bad.
Thanks a lot, Karen.
All right, thank you.
That's really great.
So one thing I really want to talk about today is especially people that are just getting to a field or changing fields or trying to get a job or became unemployed due to the pandemic or just unemployed in general, is the prospect of making yourself—
Michael, are you sharing slides?
Sorry. Yes, I share my screen. Sorry.
We don't slides and we don't see your video, just so you know.
Okay. So, okay, here. So again, hello, everyone. So partly why I'm giving this talk is just to give a perspective on finding a job if you're struggling or if you want to build your skill set for other people. So if I don't think my video is going to come up for a reason, which is fine. So let me just go through these slides and just talk about it, and feel free to ask questions along the way. And for any of the other panelists, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions as we go. So building a data science portfolio. So about me, I currently work in developer relations at Anyscale. We do distributed computing. If you're curious, I'm happy to talk about it. But today is really about talking about careers and how people get where they are. So previous to Anyscale, I worked as a data scientist at Scripps Research, and similar to what Karen worked on in a lot of ways, I worked on precision medicine in some ways. But a lot of what I did was on the All of Us Health Initiative about getting people to donate their data. I worked a lot on Fitbit wearable data, different wearable devices as well. And I also teach a course at Stanford Continuing Studies, Machine Learning with Python. So as far as what a portfolio is, because that's kind of the title of this talk, a portfolio is really just public evidence of your data science, data analytics skills, or data anything skills. It could also be open source contributions. It could be a lot of different things, which I'll cover. And the whole aspect of this talk is really about, we have a lot of things that are online that aren't necessarily career related. And oftentimes there's kind of a overlap, or there could be an overlap between your professional presence and your just online social presence. And this is really important, especially if you're out of work, you're looking for a job, you're just getting out of school, and you're just trying to get a nudge into the door. It's also great if you happen to be very experienced and you want to switch careers, or you just want to make yourself more attractive to other employers. So the goal of a portfolio is really just to show people what you can do instead of just telling them you can do something. So on a resume, if you have experience, that's fantastic and that's great. And that can get you in the door, and you don't necessarily need to have a portfolio. But if you don't have experience, or you can't get a job or whatever, portfolio can really help you get interviews, help you with networking, and also help you with those interviews. Because oftentimes for a lot of data science jobs, they give you take-home challenges where they just give you some data, and then you have to do something with it. So that could be, do some sort of algorithm, clean the data, find out some interesting trends in the data, so on and so forth. It could also just be some DevOps work, who knows? So a portfolio can be a lot of different things. And typically a resume is how people find your portfolio for a lot of people. But a lot of people also have amazing GitHub contributions. So a lot of people that contribute to a lot of great open source projects, they've, in a lot of ways, built their portfolio online. This kind of relates to a lot of what Karen said about a lot of her work is open source. You can see that she's amazing just by Googling her. You can see her GitHub, you can see her Google Scholar, you can see a lot of amazing things she's done. So there's also Kaggle. So some people have public Kaggle kernels. They have different awards, different places, different things they've shown online. So for me, I blog a lot, and I'll talk about that if you're curious. People also have a LinkedIn. So LinkedIn can also help lead to other things. There's Twitter, there's various forum accounts. Stack Overflow can get people jobs, as you'll see.
I just want to, if you wanted to share your video, so it's up to you.
I don't think
we're not
it's
seeing
showing. I think it's for whatever reason just stopped for whatever reason.
Okay.
And yeah.
All right.
So
yeah.
I would love to though, but I could debug that, I guess.
Oh no, no. I just wanted to let you know in case you wanted to be.
It's okay. I'm sorry. So the one thing I want to just emphasize is really just the importance of a portfolio. So if you ever see a job and there's an experience requirement, a lot of times getting around an experience requirement could be a bit challenging. So one way that people have gotten jobs in the past is they've showed things online. So there is a public quote by David Robinson. He's currently the principal data scientist at Heath, last time I checked. And for his first job,
we're not seeing your slides anymore. If you're trying to show slides, sorry.
I've had, I am a mess today. So I'm sharing my screen and current slide, and everyone can see my screen. Okay. So David Robinson, he was in his PhD, and he answered a question about beta distribution. And if you're curious, you can obviously go and look at this answer. So he got a job essentially because someone saw his answer, and someone from Stack Overflow was really enthusiastic about his awesome contribution to the forum. So they asked him for an interview. Long story short, let him get the job. And this is because he contributed to a forum. You see people all the time, every day, they're doing amazing work, and people notice that work and reach out to them about it. So his quote really is essentially, the more public work you do, the higher chance of a freak accident happening, where someone notices your work and points you to an opportunity, whether that be a job, something interesting, networking opportunity, and so on and so forth. And the key for a lot of these platforms is trying to do things well. But if you can't do something well, still try to contribute, because you'll never know who you'll end up helping. So the idea, of course, with all this is it's a way in the door if you can't get yourself in. It's an opportunity to showcase yourself. It's also a way to have fun or volunteer your time. So I'll talk about my portfolio really briefly, because it's not really about myself, but I'll talk about where I am right now is I'm in developer relations. So I do programming, tutorials, documentation for a lot of programming, like a lot of different programming projects. I teach courses, so I do a lot of like outward facing things. But for people that don't do a lot of outward facing things, it's still very valuable to showcase your skills going outward. It's a way to like market and advertise yourself. So for me, I do GitHub. I blog a lot, or at least I used to before I got really bogged down in a job. Of course, I can answer questions Stack Overflow, and I teach. But one thing about portfolio is if you interact with other people, portfolios don't necessarily have to be all just your own profiles or, you know, with your name plastered across the top. If you contribute some great feature to some open source project, you can get a contributor list. So there's a lot of other ways to be seen. So one thing is Tableau Public. I was on some dashboard, and one of my old colleagues, the dashboard did pretty well. People reach out to me, and I'm very grateful for her work because I wouldn't be where I am today without it. So additionally, people also do other things like YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Google Scholar. It's just ways of showing that you're more than just how you talk, ideally. So of course, other things like different talks can also help you as well. And of course, the whole idea here is that one platform leads to something else, which potentially leads to other people reaching out to you. A big part of life that I didn't realize, at least initially, for jobs is networking. So it's people you know, people you've interacted with. And this can be a way to help build your brand and build your online presence. And of course, you don't need to do everything. A lot of people don't do anything and they land up just fine. But it's really just, if you're stuck, if you're looking for a job or you want to change fields, this can be work that not only helps you learn data science or learn, you know, some Python library or machine learning, deep learning, whatever. It can be a learning experience, but also help you on your way. So it could be a project. Other ways that people build a portfolio is sometimes people build it based on job descriptions and go backward, or go back from Glassdoor interviews, let's say from Microsoft, for example. You see that a lot of jobs have requirements for like TensorFlow, PyTorch, certain libraries, certain frameworks. If you also want to show that you're able to deal with very ambiguous data, dirty data, well, oftentimes if you do a project, you showcase it on GitHub, you write a blog about it, explain your results, because a lot of data science is about communicating results and reach out to people. It could be a great way to improve your brand and give you a better chance of getting that job. Also, I should mention that just in general, whether you like my talk or not, a great thing to do when you're looking for a job or you have an interview is check Glassdoor, see if there's interview questions online to get an idea of what to expect. Because oftentimes you may not have like 1,000 interviews. You may only have a couple interviews, and it's really a good idea to try to really do a great job in them. So, and of course, one thing you see across a lot of companies that people ask about, if you see common questions people ask about, well, consider incorporating that into a project. So if you're working on some data project and it happens to be that you need to regularize a model, well, oftentimes by actually doing something, interacting with data, posting online, you often get feedback, you know, for your project on Reddit or Quora used to be one, which not so much anymore, Stack Overflow. It could be a great way to learn as well while building your online presence. So of course, there's many slides like this, and I can post these slides if people are curious. But of course, if you're trying to like look for a job and you don't know what companies you want to work for, there's other ways of finding things to put in your portfolio. It could be things that you're interested in doing. It could be working on some internship, fellowship, anything really to get you started and on your way toward a dream job, or anything else. So I'm gonna try to go to questions now if anyone has any questions. Just trying to be very conscientious of people's time. And because I think a lot of panelists have a lot of great things to say. But I just also want to mention that in like a closing sort of talk, that a portfolio is a great way to network. I've gotten jobs because of blogs I've written, and people reach out to me over some blog I wrote about some, you know, concept like a box plot or, you know, normal distribution, very simple things, but it's a great way to get yourself out there, and it's a great way to build your brand. So with that, any questions? I know I went by a little bit fast. And I'm happy to talk for the remaining amount of time if people have no questions or anything.
We don't see any yet.
Okay. So, okay, and then people just stop me if you want to do something else. Okay. So,
Just to interrupt your flow. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
One question just came in. So I'm working on building a data analyst portfolio. Is there a demand as data science?
So it depends on how people define data science versus data analyst. So the big thing is not to always go for job title when you're applying for a job, because some data science jobs are really just data analyst jobs, depending how you define it. If it's, working in Excel, it might not be as valuable as it used to be, but it doesn't mean it's not completely 100% useful as far as like monetary perspective. So one thing I should just preface, it depends on your area. So if you, especially if you want to work in person, or if they're not remote jobs you can do, is go online, go on Indeed, see what the general layout is of jobs in your area, because it's all very regional, I would argue, and then go from there. So data analyst portfolios sometimes can include, at least traditionally, things on Tableau Public, various dashboards using Power BI, things like that. It could also be just basic or analysis in pandas, things like that can also be considered data analysts. Additionally, some companies, they call their data analysts data scientists now, and they do that to get better recruitment rates. So it could also just be a title thing. Data analyst jobs are fantastic, and yeah. More questions? Happy to talk about careers, what I do, a lot of different things too. One thing I can just talk about and just wait till people interrupt me is, one thing I always hear a lot about is portfolio to help with like networking. So I've talked about, it's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to go forward in your career. But one thing people often say is like, the best way to get a job is to know someone and they'll help you get in the door. One thing I found, at least in the past calendar year and a half, is that a lot of people were laid off due to COVID or other circumstances this year. And a referral is something where someone basically vouches for your company. So the best way to get a job is, know people. But one thing that's also kind of true for referrals these days is it really helps if you're asking a pseudo stranger, is to look online for a role and then ask for referrals. So instead of asking someone like, hey, do you have any job at your company? Look online, see if there's any job titles you're interested in at the company. So like data scientist, machine learning at the company, and be like, hey, can you refer me for job X? Instead of like, look based on my profile, then come to me. It's less work to refer if you just tell them the exact job you want at their company, because oftentimes they have things posted online already.
Michael?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another question. What kind of portfolio do you recommend? Because we have full-time jobs, sometimes we don't have time to work on the bigger project.
So it depends on what you want to do. So obviously with full-time, you don't have time to work on like things often. So if you're looking for like an ML or DL role, well, and you're interested in jobs, let's say in finance, well, take a job or take some data set that's finance related, and then try to solve some problem with that data. So be very specific and very directed with your approach. So if you're just doing, let's say like courses and posting the course project online, it may not be as valuable as, yes, you need courses or whatever. Find some data set either on Kaggle or some open forum, or even scrape your own data if you really find it interesting, and then use that data set to look for some outcome or goal. So that could be a portfolio project. Put something in GitHub, have a README. READMEs are very important to explain what you're doing with your code. Or if you have Jupyter notebooks, have your code eat and things like that, or Python scripts or whatever. And then do a write-up. It can be either in the README or a blog, because a lot of data science or ML or DL is about communicating results rather than just showing people random code. Okay, more questions?
Yeah, there's another one from Steve.
Yeah.
So for data science, what's the current breakdown of employer preferences and pay levels for remote, semi-remote, and back to the offices this fall? Like, what are
Well,
the don'ts tips for being effective on doing DS remotely?
so I think one of the biggest things is if I had that information, I'd be very wealthy because I could sell it. Or I'd be, levels is a good thing just to look at. Levels is a good place to see, like, pay for different jobs, different roles, different companies. Because I find Glassdoor lately is a bit underselling how much people make in their jobs. Especially, like, I think pay's gone up a lot lately for senior level software engineers, data scientists, etc. And it depends on the company. So a lot of people haven't gone downgraded for being remote employees these days. So a lot of companies are talking about, like, oh yeah, in 6 months to a year, if you move to a cheaper area, we'll pay you less. But none of that's actually ever happened yet. I could be wrong though.
Can we ask another question?
Yeah.
So this is more of a focus type of question.
Yeah.
So of all of the components that you've highlighted, what's the highest impact? Stack Overflow, GitHub, where would you start first, for example?
So it depends. I hate doing that. It depends on your goals. So my goal was originally to get into, like, a data science role that was kind of, health related, because I worked in San Diego, which is actually where I happen to be right now, like, just visiting some people. And that was a very, like, health related area. So I focused on visualizations of, like, public health, various things with, like, wearable data. And I, blogged and I did, like, GitHub, because that was my highest ROI because it was based on my area. And there was no remote work as much back, a couple of years ago as there is now. Remote work's been around forever, but less common.
Not quite as common as it has been the last year or so.
Yeah, it's definitely increased this past year.
For sure.
And yeah, so to answer your question a little bit more, Stack Overflow, you don't hear stories about people, going big on Stack Overflow. I think Stack Overflow more helps you with interviews in a lot of ways, because it helps you formulate a response, and you get positive reinforcement if you have a good response, typically, assuming people are nice, and you have a less upvotes if you have bad response. So.
Can I, we have a few more rolling in. You're right to keep going?
Sure, I answer questions forever.
So this is the opposite type of question, if you will.
Yeah.
Just what you've done, and now let's go to the other side. So
yeah.
Basically, the question is, do I need to focus on a particular package of having one interest and focus on that, or is what I have too diverse? And I'll read everything real quick.
Sure.
Been doing Python 15 years, including bigger Django projects and XPath project. I would like to describe myself as intermediate in many areas: pricing, Node.js, Chinese, software as a service, NLP expert in none of them, quick learner, did all of that on an online portfolio 15 years ago and got 0 inquiries. So is it a 0 inquiries because it's too diverse?
So I think there's a couple aspects to this. I mean, without actually looking at your work, it'd be hard to know. And obviously things change over time. So, like, any advice I give, anyone gives, is not going to be evergreen. So advice changes over time. So if someone says, 30 years ago, you just had to go to college, get a degree, it'll be okay. Whether it's true or not, it's not for me to talk about. But things change over time. So back in, like, 2012, data science was a lot easier field to get into, for example, or 2008, those sort of times, because there's less people competing. What's happened now, at least in my personal opinion, is it's getting a lot more important to showcase yourself, because everyone's referring everyone for jobs. So people still want to see that people actually can do the job rather than just, who so to speak. And as far as the portfolio, doing something years ago, well, was your portfolio shared? Did you share with other people? Did you have code in some accessible place? Was it organized? Did you have documentation for the code to say what it does, how it works? And one thing also to consider for a very diverse portfolio, and this is something I've seen different places. If you're working for a startup, for example, having a very diverse skill set is extraordinarily valuable. In bigger companies, I find people tend to specialize more. And so that's what people tend to look for more. Another thing that's kind of also important to mention is if people don't reach out to you externally, and let's say you're applying online, which by the way, applying online is actually not the most horrible thing in the world. I can send you an article where people like apply like 500 jobs, and yeah, you may like get like a couple responses, but it's fine. Is that it could also be how people's resumes are structured if you're applying for jobs in person or like online or sending resumes to people. If people don't comment your code or get back to you, it could be an organizational issue. It could also be you didn't share your code on Reddit. You didn't share your work out there. So sharing your work is also important as also doing the work. More questions?
There are two more. Do you want to
Yeah.
hold off, or do you want to dovetail them in right now?
I can dovetail them in. Let's
All
go.
right. So this is actually a good segue as well from the last question. So I have a portfolio connected to my LinkedIn resume, and it brings traffic. You mentioned blogs. Is that a good way to create interest in your projects?
Absolutely. It depends on how good of a blogger or how much effort you put into the blogs themselves. So when I give these talks, I'm usually try to be cognizant of the fact that everyone has so much time, but I try to leave extra slides for when I get questions like this. So I can talk about resume advice if you were curious, but it's not super pertinent. Okay, so as far as blogs, my big thing on blogs is I'm more of a quality person over quantity. So it doesn't matter if you write a blog every day, although consistency is really important for getting a following and getting people to reach out to you. And of course, this graph shows like longer time is better, essentially, which is not necessarily always true. But the more time you put into something, the more likely people are going to reach out to you, because there's so much content out there these days. And the key is doing really good content that people reach out to you. So the first blog you write might not be fantastic, or the first blog I wrote was terrible. But the beautiful thing about blogs as a medium for getting people to reach out to you is you can always improve your blogs over time. So I've had blogs that have gone like 1 million views now. And when they originally published, they did not get any views because people were like, oh yeah, you should change this, or it's not very declarative, or no one viewed it at all. So I'm like, I got to change something. So you can always update your blogs with increasing knowledge, and then people are more likely to reach out to you as you improve your blog, your own knowledge as well. So, with a portfolio, by the way, one of the most important things to realize is that these things aren't static. You can always update them, or if you find that you're lacking some skill in an interview, or someone comments in your code or whatever, or if you just get no response from anyone whatsoever, you can always update these things and try to improve them over time so you get a better response from people.
One final comment.
Sure.
Question. Basically, it's someone else piping in earlier. So Steven's having some more extra information about careers.so, Stack Overflow. It's really okay for a job finding site. It allows you to specify your preferred language, software stack, locations, comp range, etc. Also, there are some links in the normal chat, just to point everyone else if you haven't seen it yet. Karen and several people have given us the levels, comparably salary sites that might help too. And Stephen, you might even put the same thing in there too. So that was really
+1 for levels.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing.
Sure.
Leading a pre-seed 6-person startup instead, as you suggested, but trying to figure out what to do as side gigs to help fund it. Previous site, by the way, was very dedicated code in 4 to 5, quote, natural languages. I think I just scared people. So I think we're just following up and give you some feedback for previously asked questions. And that's all we have at the moment. So you want to keep going?
Sure. So anyone have any other questions? So that was the question about like having like, oh yeah, side gigs. So as far as side gigs, I don't side gig much anymore, but definitely my online presence has gotten people asking me if I can work on various projects, short-term projects, those sort of things. I found that my online presence drives people to ask me like, oh, you want to do consulting? Like a lot of people ask me to do teaching because the way I structure my portfolio is a lot of like conceptual things or like how-to things, like teaching people things, rather than like, here's some, cool project I did, which is more like what you do if you want to like talk to people for like a data science role or a job interview. a lot of stuff I did is like, here's how this concept works. So people ask me to teach. So like corporate training does pay pretty well, actually. So that's one thing you can do. If you have, there's a lot of like, AngelList, those sort of things you can work on the side to make money and, fuel your startup game, so to speak. I could obviously not give advice on getting funding because I'm sure you know more about that than me. More questions?
No, I think we're good.
Cool.
Thanks a lot. That was a really great talk.
Okay, thanks.
And I do have to add one thing though,
Sure.
which is, a great way to add to your portfolio is to give a talk at BayPiggies.
Of course.
Plus one.
So seriously, if you're a beginner, we have different types of talks. You're always welcome to do that, right? And I do think, and just some personal experience, I gave a talk at, you may have heard of PyBay. That's a conference from SF Python up in San Francisco. They usually have it in August. I think they're gonna have it a little later this year. But I gave a talk there, I think it was like 3 years ago now. And I also had a series of blog posts to go along with it. And I posted it on LinkedIn as well. So one of the things I found is kind of combining multiple channels together to kind of get more impact. But as it turns out, I got more visibility, and like some guy that I worked for like 10 years earlier reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to do some consulting for me? And so I'm still working part-time for that company. So anyway, all these things, I think I totally resonate with me what you said, Michael.
Thanks.
Jeff, if I actually throw one more thing in to kind of segue to what you
Sure.
just. So I agree. PyCon is a great way. You ever want to practice your PyCon talk? Feel like you want to just get ready to try to do it, but you just want a smaller audience or a more regional audience if we happen to be in person again? This group, you could actually just pitch your talk to Jeff, and if he likes it, we can actually give it starting in 2 months. Just had to throw that out there.
So we have Nicole. She's a principal product engineer at Cadence Design. That's basically in electronic design automation. She can tell you a little bit more about what she does. And we have Bill Deegan, who's one of our co-organizers and is doing independent consulting in the Devops space. So I think what we'll do is I'll kind of start with Nicole and Bill, ask them a few questions, and then we'll kind of open it up and see if anyone else has questions, either for all the panelists or specific panelists. So I think we have a kind of a wide range of areas kind of represented here. So should be interesting. Nicole, did you want to talk? You're unmuted, right? Hi. Hello?
Yes, hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine, great. So I guess I'll ask you a few questions to start it off. How did you get interested in Python, and how does it fit into the kind of electronic design automation world?
Yes, yeah. So thanks, Jeff, for having me here. So I'm working at Cadence Design Systems. I've been to the meta for I think not last year, definitely not last year, but the year before previous year, and like for a while, maybe for 2-3 years. So I'm working on electronics design automation. What we do is basically, for example, a lot of people need to build a lot of tool for doing something. Like we need to use Outlook for checking email. We use Excel to calculate a lot of math. So electronics design automation is basically we build a lot of tools to automate the chip design flow. So internally, it's a lot of different tools. So when I get interested in Python, because that it's a huge tool chain, and there are a lot of data that we can check throughout the whole tool chain and try to improve the performance of the chip inside the CPU in your phone. So that's a high level idea of what I'm doing, like taking a lot of data and using Python to analyze it and visualize it and figure out where the bottleneck of the performance and power consumption and to improve it. So yeah.
Great, thanks. And so if someone wanted to get in that space, how would they do that? I mean, is this something where someone has a background already, something like electrical engineering, or what kind of people do you think would be good for those kinds of jobs?
That is a good question. Most of the people in our field has a background of computer engineering or electronics engineering or computer science, and or some the materials. Sorry, I'm really not expert of that, but some like yield or chip yield analysis, like things like this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I guess we'll go next to Bill.
So actually, I worked at probably 10 different EDA companies in my career, including Cadence Design Systems. So I'm very familiar with that.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, I started out with a degree in computer engineering, and I worked for a computer company, and then an EDA startup that got acquired by Cadence, and then .com, and then consulted at Cadence for a few years, and then and I don't know, 12 more startups and a few big companies. And so I've been a solo consultant since 2000. Really the way you get, at least my path to this space, was to realize I had some skill sets that were useful at a lot of different companies. And I had ability to communicate that well. Maybe not so much tonight, but we'll see. I was not afraid of dealing with change and uncertainty. So for example, as a consultant, tomorrow they could call you up and say, hey, your contract's over. And if you're going to have a heart attack every time that happens, do not be a consultant. But if you see that as just sort of a sign that it's something else interesting is going to come up, then you can roll with the change. Then it's not a bad space to be in. Does that answer the general question?
That's good. And you're in DevOps now, right?
Well, DevOps is sort of, I'm not sure it's exactly the right term, but generally I work with build and test automation and developer productivity tools. So I found, I guess at my first startup, that I really enjoyed building tools to help people on the teams I work with be more productive. And that's a very high leverage task, right? So if I can say, save every engineer in a 100-person team 5 minutes a day, that's some real, value, and value that translates into being able to charge a reasonably good rate per hour, and pay for food and lodging and other fun things.
Cool. And do you have like one client or multiple clients, or
So I usually, as an independent consultant, there's some requirements to ensure that you're not recategorized as a statutory employee. But one of them is certainly to always try and have more than one client, either at a time or in a tax year. So currently I have 3 clients.
Oh, great.
One downside to having multiple clients is sometimes all their release schedules line up, and then you're getting crushed with work. But you're also getting paid by the hour, so it's not the worst problem to have.
Cool. Okay. You have anything else you want to add, or we can?
So I definitely would say, like in the course of my consulting, there's been a number of open source projects that have been very useful in my consulting practice. And as a result, I got involved with those projects, and actually I help manage 2 of them currently as a way to, A, give back, and B, to sort of help guide those projects into directions that I thought were useful for myself, for my clients, and just for all the users of those projects. So, and that also does yield visibility and work, offers of work, and consulting projects.
Great. Yeah, and I know one of those is SCONS, right? The build
Yeah.
tool, you talked about that.
Yeah, SCON's a Python-based make replacement, and also BuildBot, which is a CI tool, also
Oh,
Python-based.
wow. Cool. Yes, I've heard of that too. So I have a question for Michael,
Sure.
just to mix things up a bit. So you were doing data science and now you're a developer advocate. So why did you, or why and how did you make that change?
Well, so
What's the difference, I guess?
So before I worked at, a little background, I worked at Scripps Research, Translational Institute in La Jolla, California, which is fantastic. I worked on wearable devices like Fitbits, a lot of wearable data, other things you've probably never heard of, like heart monitors. And right now they're actually doing work on like trying to detect COVID before you notice the symptoms just by physiological signals. So that was very interesting and I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was a research position. So research has a lot of great benefits, a couple of drawbacks, but I got reached out to by a couple of universities to teach courses. So I took a break from Scripps to teach courses. And I started teaching for Stanford Community Studies. I started making LinkedIn Learning classes because I had a lot of blogs online. People asked me to like make courses. So I made them because I'm like, okay, this is fun. So I took a little break from like research world. And then while I was making courses, people reached out to me from AnyScale about developer relations because I apparently was what they were looking for in terms of communicating like how distributed computing works. Even though I never written about distributed computing really, they just like my communication style. So I got into that sort of thing because a lot of what I do now is writing, editing, occasionally appearing on camera, assuming my webcam works, which sorry about that today, by the way.
No problem.
And also because I wanted to try something new, something exciting, something that's like a startup. So using a lot of different skills. So, but nothing wrong with being like normal data scientist or anything. It's just, I still program, just not as often.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We have a comment, I think, from Stephen. I'm trying to, let's see. As California AB5 law plus the trend towards remote reduce the propensity of California employers to hire contractors or consultants? Or are you required to go through third-party staffing companies? How much work has gone out of state? I don't know if anyone has an answer to that.
Well, one of my clients had me go to a third party and lots of questioning and background paperwork. Yeah, it's definitely not made things easier. And, you know, the problem is that, well, it's kind of a political discussion, but clearly no company is taking advantage of people who are providing high value consulting, in my mind. And to make it harder for us to work for companies to provide value is just kind of ludicrous. So it's frustrating to deal with unnecessary barriers to getting work. Luckily, one client's out of state, one client's in state, so that makes it a little bit easier.
My 2 cents on this is that's definitely made it more difficult for some things, even just in terms of paperwork. Because when there's more laws, you have to, you know, fill out your hours more clearly instead of getting lump sums or some things, for example. At least in like the teaching space, I now have to document every hour I teach, versus before I just got paid a lump sum for teaching a course or whatever. Anyway, so that's in the teaching realm of things.
Cool. I guess I can chime in with my experience. Well, when I was working with kind of startups and most companies, I didn't have much trouble, but I did have like one very large company that was with had 2 letters in their name, now have 3 letters in their name. And I had to go through a third party on that. And they took like 10% of the contract. So I wasn't very happy with that. So we have a question in the in the chat for Nicole. This is from Han. It is, which Python modules do you use the most in your work?
That's a good question. For visualization, just like a lot of plotting from pandas, and then like I personally use Seaborn and Matplotlib just as others do. So not just basic modules, but for some kind of like correlation analysis, like just all those like data science analysis modules. Yeah, I hope that answers.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
I want to make a quick comment on the portfolio or the other thing. There's no one guaranteed answer on ways to get attention on your profile. It's like predicting what meme or phrase is going to go viral. It's a little bit hard to do. Sometimes you strike it, and as Michael said, and sometimes you don't. But what you're doing is placing fishing lines in the water in different spots in the lake all at one time. And sometimes it strikes or not, but at that right moment when somebody's interested in your profile, they may look for things and see that you have, a few different things in a few different places. And it's hard to predict in advance, but it's always a good policy to be involved, volunteer in your community, like BayPiggies or PyBay is always looking for volunteers when they were online last year. Those kinds of resources, sometimes it's not the ROI on it, the return on investment is not always clear in that moment, but sometimes it's an intangible collection of assets that make a difference when an employer is going to reach out to you as a cold request, or if you are applying for a job, they may look for you and see you in a few places. So your best strategy is not to agonize too much over it. Just do your best and try to stay on top of upcoming trends and changes, because technology changes from year to year, and be aware of what's going on, but don't agonize too much about getting it right. Just try to diversify your portfolio in terms of your presence is what I'm trying to say.
Good advice.
Excellent.
Exactly. Jeff, I can add a little bit. So
Sure.
I personally did a portfolio maybe 2 years ago, just because I want to make sure I know how to do a good portfolio for Python data science. So I had a mentor at that time, and for example, we did two portfolio. So one we will focus on for people who are trying to learn data science. For one, we focus on more basic machine learning models like all those decision trees or regression. But for the other one, we focus on deep learning. And I had some difficulty for choosing a deep learning project, but I think most of the projects have coverage to either computer vision or natural language processing for the past 2 or 3 years. So I guess depending on different kinds of careers or jobs that people are looking for, maybe the portfolio can be consistent with their career goals. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions?
I guess on that side, if you didn't have open source work, having something as a project, even for full stack work, something that features an API that, a package that can run something, an API, something that you can spin up and shows an API development that to solve a problem. It's always helpful, especially if people can't see your code. Sometimes it gets you a little goodwill in advance of having a more rigorous set of hoops to jump through to get some initial conversations. And you can talk about your design decisions along the way and experiments and what worked and what didn't work. Because it's actually really compelling to me when I'm hiring somebody that they understand the process of debugging things and working through problems and making choices. And that comes from actually doing things and trying them out and changing things. And you can tell pretty easily if somebody has spent some time doing things on their own, or if they've been kind of like, all right, you're working in this shop, you do this task, and you do this task, and you do this task, or whether they've made some, put some independent thought on how to make it better, or how to change something, or how to make something to solve a problem. Certainly in my space, we're part of a bigger ecosystem, but we're pretty isolated. So in research software engineering, you have to be able to look at the kinds of tools and trends that are out there, talk to your teammates, you maybe talk to other institutions, maybe talk to people in the community, maybe just, kind of try some different things. And that no matter which industry you're in, whether you're in our kind of group or in a startup or in a big company, that kind of ongoing learning, being able to win, try and show things is always going to win you favor, both internal to your company or when you're trying to get a new job.
Well said.
And people are going to ask you about what your failures were. And that's okay. I mean, things break sometimes, or maybe you made something that didn't work correctly. And being able to fix it when it goes wrong is just as important as being able to make it, because you have to understand how it works.
Yes. I have maybe one perspective I can add that might be useful to people. I don't know. So about a year and a half ago, I was trying to hire some data scientists / programmer types for one of my clients. And we interviewed a bunch of people, looked at lots of resumes. Most of them were coming from a local college that had a master's degree in like computer science focused on data science. And what we found is, so two things. One is I was looking for some sign of their portfolio, right? So the people who had something to show me that was obviously going to give them like 10 points more than, just whatever they had on their resume, because they might have a line about their class. Most of them didn't have work experience. So they might have a few lines about their class projects, but having a portfolio and having more would help a lot, particularly if I could make sense of it, right? You go to GitHub, if it's something that was like someone just dumped their class project there, that's not good either. So that's one other comment I'd make, because I've seen a lot of that. And also, I also would say graduate student code is the worst code in the world. But anyway, but the other thing I would put out is, if you're going for a data science job, maybe I'm unusual in this, but I was also looking at their Python skills. So what tripped up a lot of people in the interviews is, I don't like to go into lots of code on a whiteboard, but I would try to get them, walk them through some problems where you're traversing a hierarchical data structure. Let's say like a JSON document that you parsed that has an arbitrary number of levels. Most of them could not do that. And the guy we hired could do that. So so that's something to also think about, is make sure you have kind of, if you're in the data science side, that's great. But also make sure you have kind of the basics on the programming side too, right? Because though, I think that's eventually you have to write code and it has to work, and it has to be shared with other people. I think we have a few more comments now. So comment from Stephen, a good way of getting your toes wet before contributing to open source is raising bugs, doorbells on a package people use a lot. Clear, concise, reproducible test cases with footnotes and references to other bugs and docs pages. A lot of people complain on mailing lists channels, few put the effort in raising bugs. I think that's a really good point, right? If you can clearly describe what the problem is and how to reproduce it, you'll be the maintainers will love you, I'm sure. So Craig has another comment. in my case, I can't show the key things in a portfolio. Yeah, because it's not open source, I think, basically. Speaking of APIs, what's the status of GraphQL in the Python world? I don't know if anyone has an answer to that. I used it for the first time a couple weeks ago and I was crying, but that's another story.
I can answer a little bit about like if you can't show things publicly. I mean, that's your work. You can't show it publicly. Most of the stuff is like sometimes it's work on things outside of your work time. Most of the time, really, unless you're working in open source work for your day job. And a lot of this is about just giving yourself more options or more, potential ways to reel in, clients or hopefully get people more interested if you have to apply for a job or need work or whatever. So, I mean, it's all about what works for you. A lot of people don't have portfolios and they do just fine because their work experience is, absolutely exceptional. But it's all about giving yourself the most options humanly possible.
I don't have a portfolio.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a lot of things online.
Yeah, if you're doing
Very
enough
impressive.
public work, it doesn't matter. You don't really need it because you already have it, right?
Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying it's like, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no one true path.
Yeah, there's not one true path at all
Yeah,
whatsoever.
it's like if you when people say I did this, some people hear I did this thing, do this thing, and then your magic dream jobs will come. And I just want to say sometimes it's not guaranteed. Sometimes you hear about it, because somebody else is doing a thing, or they posted a tweet, or they see you're following the right people on Twitter, so you happen to know that this other thing happened, and so you knew about this thing and attended the conference, and then you met somebody else. It's there's not a linear route, and I know that people make these like crazy awesome homepages that you can link to, and I think mine just has like a circle that you click on, it just spins around, because I just thought that was funny. So I mean, yeah, so I do have other things because I've been doing the research stuff. I just want, like, if you're working on some things, like, I would recommend have a thing that you're interested in, might be interested enough, as Jeff said, that you might want to fix it or change it over time or update it when it goes out of date. Because if you have an old repo from 2 years ago for a project that you've never looked at again, and all the packages are out of date, can't be run, can't, especially if you're going to show it to somebody, that's the other thing that I would say. If you make a thing one time and then you're looking for jobs, you should check that thing still works or can be run and update it appropriately. That's a value to me, because all the time we have to update and upgrade things. That's a subtle value add that's like more important for me to see a profile page if somebody is like paying attention to something and doesn't upgrade, and documents it.
That's a good point. And I think Stephen had another comment, also adding relevant work around cookbook recipes, I guess, to open source projects. And any other comments, questions? I was gonna say, I had a minor disheartening thing the other day. I posted something on Twitter and I got like 9 views. And then I look at my feed, I see someone posted a video of chickens and they got like, thousands, hundreds of thousands of views. And so
I think you have to, possibly you need more chickens, puppies, kittens.
yeah.
If you have a meme attached to it, Jeff, it's,
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, but it's a game, but it's an art. I've seen like 3-line tweets go viral, and it also depends on what's that news media that day. It's like surfing. Some days the waves are going to be good and sometimes they're not, and it kind of depends on a lot of other things. So it's not you, Jeff, it's the world.
Yeah, but I should get some more chicken videos. That's what I learned from that.
All right, it seems like, oh, Jeff needs the chicken with the blue pants video. I don't know what that means, but I'm a little bit afraid.
This one was
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes things that are viral are, you want to unsee them. It seems like questions are, I think we're winding down in terms of questions, unless you have anything else you want to say, Jeff.
I think that's all I have. Does anyone on the panel have anything? I want to thank everyone.
Yeah, and
Thanks
thank
for having
you.
us. And
Thank you.
thanks for everyone for coming too. I know it's late.
Yes. I appreciate everyone, your loyal attendance in these challenging times.
Yeah, it
And
was
good luck.
really, oh, sorry, Jeff.
I was just gonna say good luck. If you're looking for a job, good luck.
It was a really good discussion tonight. Lots of interaction. That was really fun. So thank you
Yeah.
everyone for joining us tonight.
Yes.
Oh, I'm not clicking on it, Craig. Don't try. No, I'm just kidding. Probably I'll click on it later when I'm not going to be embarrassed on the. And thank you, Stephen, for your compliment. Okay, I think we can wrap it up then if everybody's good. Thanks everybody. Thanks Darlene, Craig, everybody who's had comments today, and thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Jeff, as always, being the master of ceremonies, and Glenn and Bill who helped make BayPiggies run. It's during the pandemic. Grateful that we have this opportunity to see each other even in virtually online, and hopefully the way the vaccines and other things are working, hopefully we'll be able to meet in person somewhere sometime this year. That's my hope, because that's the #1 thing that I'm going to say in terms of getting jobs is networking with people and talking with people and finding out about them in different ways, at meetups, at conferences. Take the opportunity to say hello to a person, find out what their experience is, connect with them on LinkedIn. Those kinds of connections are really powerful, because one of the other important things that's really important is you want super bright, dedicated people who want to do good work. And you also want to work with other good humans. And so it's a way to show that you're a good human who would be good to work with in a non-interview way. That's my opinion.